I thought my daughter would cry tears of joy when I handed her that envelope containing $24,000. Instead, Sarah's face drained of color as expensive laughter echoed from her living room. "Please, Mom, my mother-in-law is here. I can't have you right now," she whispered frantically, glancing toward the voices. Before I could respond, she snatched the envelope, stuffed my inheritance check into her pocket without even looking at it, and physically pushed me toward the door. I sat in my car afterward, hands trembling on the steering wheel, watching through her window as she rejoined the wealthy Patterson family who had never once acknowledged my existence. That's when everything clicked into place. I picked up my phone and made one call, and the drive home from Sarah's house felt like traveling through a fog of memories, each one more painful than the last. 3 years had passed since my only child married Brad Patterson, and I could pinpoint the exact moment everything changed between us. It wasn't gradual like I'd tried to convince myself. It was swift and deliberate, like a door slamming shut. Before Brad, Sarah called me every evening after work. We'd talk about everything and nothing. Her job at the marketing firm, my work at Hartford General Hospital, where I'd been an administrator for 22 years, the new recipe I'd tried, or the book she was reading. She'd stop by my apartment twice a week with takeout Chinese food, and we'd watch those cooking shows she loved while sharing stories about our days. My husband Michael died when Sarah was only 12 years old. Heart attack at 45, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. One day he was coaching Sarah's soccer practice the next day. I was planning his funeral and figuring out how a single mother survives on one income. Those were dark years, but Sarah and I became a team. We had to be. I worked double shifts at the hospital to keep her in St. Catherine's Academy, the private school Michael had insisted on before he died. While other kids' parents drove luxury cars to school pickup, I arrived in my dented Honda Civic, still wearing my hospital scrubs. Sarah never complained, never acted embarrassed. She'd run to my car with a bright smile and chatter about her day as if I were the most important person in her world. College was the same story. I took out loans, worked overtime, sold Michael's tools and golf clubs to pay for Sarah's education at Boston University. She studied business with dreams of opening her own boutique someday. Every semester, she'd call to thank me for making her dreams possible. She graduated summa cum laude, and when she walked across that stage, she pointed to me in the audience and mouthed, "This is for you, Mom." That was the daughter I remembered. That was the daughter I thought I was surprising with Aunt Dorothy's inheritance money. But the woman who pushed me out of her house today was someone else entirely. This transformation began the moment she brought Brad Patterson home for dinner 3 years ago. He walked into my modest 2-bedroom apartment with the air of someone visiting a museum exhibit. His eyes swept over my second-hand furniture, my small kitchen table with the wobbly leg, my collection of ceramic birds that Michael used to buy me for our anniversary each year. "Quaint," he'd said, and somehow made it sound like an insult. Sarah had giggled nervously and launched into explanations about everything. "Mom's had that couch forever, it's so comfortable though. And those birds are sentimental, Dad bought them," as if she needed to justify my life to this stranger. Brad's family owned Patterson Construction, a company that had been building expensive homes in the Boston area for 3 generations. They lived in Beacon Hill in a house that had been featured in architectural magazines. Sarah showed me the articles online, pointing out the marble columns and crystal chandeliers with an awe that made my heart sink. After their engagement, Sarah's visits became less frequent. She'd call with elaborate excuses about dinner plans with Brad's family charity galas, for causes I'd never heard her mention weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard that sounded like foreign expeditions when she described them. Her vocabulary changed too. Suddenly, she was talking about summer houses and wine pairings and investment opportunities as if these concepts had always been part of her world. The wedding was the final blow. I'd saved money for 2 years to buy her the pearl necklace she'd admired in a jewelry store window. When I gave it to her on her wedding morning, she barely looked at it before handing it to her maid of honor to put with the other gifts. The maid of honor, Brad's sister Caroline, smirked as she tossed my carefully wrapped present onto a pile of silver-wrapped boxes from Tiffany and Cartier. At the reception, I sat at table 12 with Sarah's college roommate and some distant relatives I barely knew. The Patterson family occupied the head table, of course, along with their society friends. Every time I tried to catch Sarah's eye during the toasts, she was laughing at something Mrs. Patterson whispered in her ear. The final insult came when they left for their honeymoon in Italy. Sarah hugged me goodbye at the reception, but it was one of those brief, obligatory hugs you give to acquaintances. "We'll call you when we get back," she'd promised. They didn't call for 3 weeks. That first Christmas after the wedding, Sarah invited me to dinner at their new apartment. I spent hours preparing my famous apple pie, the same recipe I'd made for her birthday every year since she was 5. When I arrived, I discovered Brad's family was also there, and the dining room table was already crowded with store-bought desserts from an expensive bakery. Sarah took my pie and disappeared into the kitchen. I never saw it again and no one mentioned it. The pattern continued. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Invitations were extended with conditions. "Can you come for lunch on Saturday, but we'll need to keep it brief because we have plans later." Plans that never included me. Last year, Sarah moved into the house in Brookline, a wedding gift from Brad's parents. She gave me a tour that felt more like a real estate showing than a homecoming. Everything was white and pristine and expensive. She walked me through each room like a stranger, pointing out the imported Italian marble and the custom-built cabinets. When we reached the guest room, she casually mentioned it would be converted into Brad's home office soon. "Where will I stay when I visit?" I'd asked. "Oh, we have that lovely hotel just down the street," she'd replied without missing a beat. The phone calls dwindled to once a month, then once every few months. Our conversations became stilted and formal. Sarah would ask about my health and my job with the distracted tone of someone checking items off a list. When I tried to share news about my life, she'd interrupt with stories about the Patterson family's latest acquisitions or achievements. 6 months ago, Aunt Dorothy died unexpectedly. She was my father's sister, a woman who had never married and had built a small restaurant chain from nothing. Dorothy was tough and practical, everything the Patterson family pretended to be, but weren't. In her will, she left everything to me, the restaurants, her savings, her investments. After taxes and the sale of the businesses, it came to just over $200,000. I could have kept it all. I could have finally bought a decent car, moved to a nicer apartment, maybe even taken that trip to Ireland I'd dreamed about since Michael died. But sitting in the lawyer's office holding that check, I could think of only one thing: Sarah's dream of owning her own home, the dream she'd talked about since college. So I decided to give her $24,000 for a down payment. It wasn't the full amount I'd inherited, but it was enough to help her start building the life she wanted. I'd surprised her on her birthday 2 years ago with concert tickets to see her favorite band. I'd surprised her the year before with a weekend spa trip. This year, I wanted to surprise her with something that would change her life. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my car outside her house, watching through the window as Sarah rejoined her party. The money came from Dorothy, a woman who had started with nothing and built an empire through determination and hard work. She would have been disgusted to see her great niece pushing her own mother out the door to impress people who valued bank accounts more than character. But what broke my heart wasn't just Sarah's behavior, It was the look in her eyes when she saw me at her door. Not embarrassment, not nervousness, but genuine panic, as if having me there would ruin something important, as if I were the shameful secret she needed to hide from the people who mattered. I started my Honda and drove away from my daughter's house, but I couldn't drive away from the truth that had been building for 3 years. I'd lost Sarah long before today. The question was whether it was too late to get her back, or if it was time to accept that the daughter I'd raised and loved had chosen a different family entirely. That night, I sat in my apartment holding my reading glasses, preparing to call Frank Morrison about Dorothy's estate details. That's when I realized I'd left them at Sarah's house. Without thinking twice, I drove back to return for them. What I saw through her living room window changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter's marriage, her in-laws, and the real reason she'd taken my money. Through Sarah's living room window, I watched my daughter hold up the check I'd just given her like a trophy. The Patterson family gathered around her, their faces bright with satisfaction. Mrs. Patricia Patterson, Brad's mother, examined the check with the practiced eye of an appraiser evaluating merchandise. Well, at least the woman is finally useful for something. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried clearly through the thin glass. Though $24,000 won't cover much of the renovations we discussed for the upstairs bathrooms. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Sarah nodded eagerly, hanging on every word from her mother-in-law's lips, like a student desperate to please a demanding teacher. Brad's father, Robert Patterson, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and studied the check over his wife's shoulder. "It's a start," he said with the tone of a man accustomed to receiving tribute. "We can use this for the marble countertops and apply for additional credit using Sarah's income for the rest of the project." Sarah beamed at their approval like a child who'd finally brought home a good report card. She clutched the check to her chest and said something I couldn't quite hear, but her body language spoke volumes. She was practically glowing with pride at having delivered exactly what they'd expected from her. I ducked below the window line and crept back to my car on unsteady legs. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and rage and disbelief. They thought I was useful for my money. They thought $24,000 was just the beginning of what they could extract from the naive old woman with the dead husband and the working-class apartment. But the worst part was Sarah, my daughter, my only child. The girl I'd sacrificed everything for had transformed into their willing accomplice. She wasn't being manipulated or coerced. She was a full participant in treating me like a bank account with legs. That realization hit me like a physical blow. I pulled over at a gas station and sat in the parking lot sobbing until my chest ached. 26 years of bedtime stories and scraped knee bandages and proud moments at school plays. 26 years of working extra shifts and eating generic cereal so she could have name brand everything. 26 years of believing that love and sacrifice created unbreakable bonds between mother and daughter. All of it reduced to a check that would pay for bathroom renovations in a house where I wasn't welcome. But as I sat there crying, something else began to build inside me. It started as a small ember of anger and grew into a flame of determination. If they thought I was just a useful old woman too naive to understand what was happening, they were about to learn otherwise. I wiped my eyes, started my car, and drove home with a new sense of purpose. The crying was over. The planning was about to begin. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to Hartford General, I spent the day at the public library researching the Patterson family. What I found was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. Patterson Construction's website boasted about their prestigious projects and generations of craftsmanship, but a deeper dive into public records told a different story. The company had been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months. They'd lost 3 major contracts to competitors who bid significantly lower. Their Beacon Hill house had been remortgaged twice in the past year. Robert Patterson had liens against the business for unpaid suppliers and subcontractors. The family that Sarah worshipped for their wealth and status was drowning in debt, keeping up appearances through credit and manipulation. But my real breakthrough came when I researched Sarah's job situation. According to her LinkedIn profile, she was listed as marketing director at Prestige Events Management. But when I called the company pretending to be a potential client, asking to speak with director Sarah Patterson, the receptionist corrected me immediately. "Sarah Patterson is an administrative assistant here," she said cheerfully, "but I can transfer you to our marketing director if you'd like to discuss your event needs." An administrative assistant. My daughter, with her business degree from Boston University, with all her talk about managing campaigns and overseeing client portfolios, was answering phones and filing paperwork for someone else. The salary for that position couldn't possibly support the lifestyle she'd been pretending to live, which meant the Patterson family had been using her modest income and clean credit history to prop up their failing construction business and maintain their expensive lifestyle. Sarah wasn't joining high society. She was being used as a financial life preserver by people who were slowly drowning. That afternoon, I made the most important phone call of my life. Frank Morrison answered on the second ring, his voice exactly as I remembered from Michael's funeral 15 years ago. "Annabelle Walsh. My goodness, how long has it been?" Frank's warmth came through the phone like a hug. "I was so sorry to hear about Dorothy's passing. She was quite a woman." Frank had been Michael's roommate at law school before life took them in different directions. Michael became a teacher and coach. Frank became one of Boston's most respected estate and fraud attorneys. He'd handled Dorothy's will and had been trying to reach me about some final paperwork when I called him. "Frank, I need your help with something unusual." I began then told him the entire story of Sarah's behavior and what I'd witnessed at her house. Frank listened without interrupting, his legal mind processing every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Annabelle, that check you gave Sarah hasn't been cashed yet, has it?" I confirmed it hadn't. I'd written it that morning and taken it directly to her house. "Good. Don't let her deposit it yet. Tell her there's a problem with your account if she asks. I want to run some research on the Patterson family finances before we proceed. What you're describing sounds like a pattern of financial exploitation." Frank's tone shifted into professional mode. "I'm going to need you to do something difficult. For the next few days, act completely normal with Sarah. Don't let on that you suspect anything. Can you do that?" The poker face phase was beginning, and I was about to become the best actress of my life. Sarah called me the next evening, her voice bubbling with fake enthusiasm. "Mom, I can't thank you enough for that wonderful surprise yesterday. Brad and I are so grateful for your generosity." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm just happy I could help with your house projects." "Actually, Mom, we were wondering, when should we expect to be able to deposit the check? We're eager to get started on the renovations." My heart pounded, but my voice remained calm. "There's a small delay with the estate accounts, honey. The lawyers need to process some paperwork first. It should be resolved within a week or two." Sarah's disappointment was obvious, but she covered it quickly. "Oh, of course. Estate things are always complicated. We'll just wait patiently." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like a stranger in my own life. When had I become someone who lied to her daughter? When had my daughter become someone I needed to lie to? But Frank's research over the next few days revealed the full scope of what I was dealing with. The Patterson family wasn't just financially troubled. They were involved in a systematic pattern of exploiting elderly relatives and family connections. Frank's contacts in the financial community uncovered credit applications where Robert Patterson had listed me as a reference without my knowledge. They'd used my name, address, and employment information to secure loans they had no intention of repaying. "Annabelle," Frank said when he called with his findings, "this goes much deeper than your daughter taking advantage of your generosity. The Pattersons have been committing fraud using your identity. We need to involve law enforcement." The thought of my daughter facing criminal charges made me feel sick, but Frank's next discovery eliminated any sympathy I might have had for her situation. "Sarah isn't just a victim here," he continued. "The loan applications required information only she could have provided. Your social security number, your employment details, your financial history. She's been feeding them information about you for months, possibly years. My daughter hadn't just chosen the Patterson family over me. She'd been actively helping them steal from me while pretending to be the loving, grateful child I'd raised. That night I stood in my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was 67 years old, tired from decades of hard work and sacrifice, but not broken, not defeated. I'd survived my husband's death, raised a child alone, built a career in healthcare administration, and earned the respect of my colleagues through dedication and competence. I was not going to let anyone, including my own daughter, treat me like a foolish old woman whose only value was her bank account. The poker face phase was in full effect. Sarah continued calling every few days to check on the estate paperwork delay. I continued making excuses while Frank and his investigator gathered evidence. The Patterson family had no idea that their latest mark was fighting back with the help of one of Boston's best attorneys. They thought they were dealing with a naive woman who could be manipulated and discarded. They were about to learn that underestimating Annabelle Walsh was the biggest mistake they'd ever made. Frank Morrison's investigator was a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Walsh, who shared my last name but no relation. She was a former Boston police detective who specialized in financial crimes, and her findings about the Patterson family painted a picture so disturbing I had to read her report twice to believe it. "The gambling started 18 months ago," Janet explained when she presented her findings in Frank's downtown office. "Brad Patterson has been frequenting Foxwoods Resort Casino and several underground poker games in the Back Bay area. According to my sources, he owes approximately $60,000 to various creditors, including some very unforgiving people." She slid a photograph across the conference table. It showed Brad entering a brownstone building that Janet identified as an illegal gambling operation. The timestamp indicated it was taken 3 weeks ago, long after Sarah had told me about their quiet life and responsible financial planning. "Robert Patterson's construction company is essentially bankrupt," Janet continued. "They've been paying current bills with money borrowed against future contracts they don't actually have. The Beacon Hill house is mortgaged beyond its market value. They owe $43,000 to Brookline Country Club for membership fees and event charges going back 8 months. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come." Janet opened another file folder and pulled out copies of loan applications bearing my name and signature. "These applications were submitted to 3 different financial institutions over the past 6 months," she said. "Each one lists you as guarantor for loans totaling $75,000. The applications include detailed information about your employment, your inheritance from Dorothy's estate, and your personal banking information." My hands trembled as I examined the documents. The signatures looked exactly like mine, but I had never seen these papers before in my life. "The information required for these applications could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of your financial situation," Frank added grimly. "Someone who had access to your personal documents and banking records." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah had been in my apartment countless times over the years. She knew where I kept my important papers. She'd helped me organize Dorothy's estate documents just 2 months ago. She'd been the one person I trusted completely with every detail of my financial life. And she'd been using that trust to help the Patterson family forge my signature and steal my identity. Janet's investigation had uncovered even more disturbing details. The Patterson family had been telling people in their social circle that I was dying of cancer and had become mentally unstable in my final months. This explained why they could claim I was willingly giving them money while also being too ill to participate in normal family activities. Mrs. Patricia Patterson has been quite vocal at the country club about your supposed condition, Janet reported. She's told several people that you're in the early stages of dementia and often forget conversations and commitments. She's also claimed that you're a disturbed woman who stalks Sarah and makes unreasonable demands on her time. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They weren't just stealing my money. They were systematically destroying my reputation to justify excluding me from Sarah's life. Every declined invitation, every canceled plan, every excuse about being too busy had been part of a calculated strategy to paint me as the problem. But Janet saved the worst revelation for last. She'd discovered that I wasn't the Patterson family's first elderly victim. Frank's law firm had connections throughout New England, and a few discreet inquiries had revealed a pattern of exploitation spanning several years. Patricia Patterson's sister in Tampa lost her retirement savings 2 years ago, Janet explained. She was convinced to invest in a construction project that never existed. When she tried to recover her money, the family claimed she was confused due to medication side effects and had willingly given them the funds as a gift. There was also a widowed cousin in Providence who had mortgaged her paid-off house to help Brad start a consulting business that turned out to be a front for his gambling debts. When the cousin demanded repayment, the family cut off all contact and spread rumors about her mental stability. We're looking at a family that has systematically targeted elderly relatives and family friends for years, Frank summarized. They use emotional manipulation forged documents and destroy reputations to cover their tracks. Sarah isn't just an innocent bystander who got caught up in their schemes. She's been actively participating in gathering information and maintaining the deceptions. That night, I sat in my apartment trying to reconcile the daughter I thought I knew with the woman who had been helping strangers rob her own mother. I pulled out photo albums from Sarah's childhood, looking for signs I might have missed, warning signals that could have prepared me for this betrayal. But every picture showed the same thing, a happy child who seemed to adore her mother. Sarah at age 6 hugging me tight after her first piano recital. Sarah at 13 grinning proudly next to me at her middle school graduation. Sarah at 18 crying tears of joy when she opened her acceptance letter to Boston University. When had that loving child become a woman capable of forging my signature and spreading lies about my mental health? When had the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for decided I was worth more to her as a victim than as a mother? The next morning brought another piece of evidence that shattered what remained of my illusions about Sarah's innocence. Janet called to tell me she'd been monitoring Sarah's credit card activity as part of the investigation. She made a purchase yesterday that I think you need to know about, Janet said carefully. A $3,000 bracelet from Cartier charged to a credit card that shows your name as an authorized user. A card you never signed up for. Frank confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah had opened the credit card using my information and had been using it for months to maintain the lifestyle the Patterson family expected from her. The bracelet was just the latest in a series of purchases designed to keep up appearances among people who measured worth by possessions rather than character. That evening, Sarah called to check on the status of my check again. Her voice was sweet and concerned, exactly like the daughter I remembered from better times. "Mom, We're getting a bit anxious about the estate paperwork, she said. Brad's been looking at materials for the bathroom renovation, and we really want to get started before winter sets in. Of course, sweetheart, I replied, my poker face now perfected through practice. Actually, I was thinking it might be nice to have a family dinner soon. You could show me the plans for the renovation, and maybe we could discuss some additional ways I might be able to help. Sarah's excitement was immediate and genuine. Oh, Mom, that would be wonderful. Brad and his parents would love to see you again. When were you thinking? We scheduled dinner for the following Saturday evening. As I hung up the phone, I felt like an actor preparing for the performance of my life. Frank and Janet would be ready with recording equipment and legal documents. The poker face phase was about to end, and the confrontation phase was about to begin. But first, Frank had one more devastating piece of information to share with me. His contacts at several Boston area banks had uncovered something that explained the urgency behind the Patterson family's recent actions. Annabelle, they're not just in debt, he told me during our final planning meeting. They're facing foreclosure on the Beacon Hill house within 60 days. The country club has threatened to revoke their membership if they don't pay their outstanding balance immediately, and Brad owes money to people who don't accept excuses or payment plans. The family that Sarah admired for their wealth and status was weeks away from losing everything. My $24,000 wasn't just for bathroom renovations. It was a desperate attempt to stave off complete financial collapse, which meant the dinner conversation was going to be even more interesting than I'd anticipated. They weren't just planning to manipulate me into giving them more money. They were fighting for their survival, and they saw me as their only lifeline. They had no idea they were about to discover that lifelines can sometimes turn into nooses. Frank Morrison's law office felt different when I arrived for our final planning meeting. Gone was the comfortable atmosphere of our earlier conversations. This felt like a war room preparing for battle. Janet Walsh had her recording equipment laid out on the conference table like a surgeon arranging instruments. Frank was reviewing legal documents with the focused intensity of a man who'd built his career on attention to detail. The beauty of this situation, Annabelle, is that they're going to incriminate themselves, Frank explained as he showed me the papers I'd be carrying into Sarah's house. These look like standard gift agreements and estate transfer documents, but they're actually confessions to fraud and forgery. If they sign them, we'll have everything we need for criminal prosecution. Janet demonstrated how the recording equipment worked. A small device would be hidden in my purse, capable of capturing clear audio from anywhere in Sarah's house. The key is to stay calm and let them do most of the talking, she advised. People who are desperate make mistakes, and the Patterson family is beyond desperate right now. Frank's investigation had revealed the true scope of their financial crisis. The Beacon Hill house was scheduled for foreclosure in 47 days. The country club had sent a final notice demanding immediate payment of all outstanding fees. Most importantly, Brad's gambling creditors had escalated their collection efforts. He'd been photographed with a black eye and bruised ribs after a conversation with two men outside his apartment building. They need a minimum of $80,000 within the next month to avoid complete disaster, Frank explained. Your $24,000 check was just the beginning. They're planning to extract every penny they can from you as quickly as possible. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would arrive for dinner appearing eager to help, but requiring certain legal formalities. Frank would be positioned nearby ready to assist if the situation escalated beyond my control. Janet would monitor the audio feed and document everything for potential law enforcement involvement. But first I needed to make a phone call that would set the entire trap in motion. Sarah, honey, I have wonderful news, I said when she answered. The estate issues are finally resolved, and I can access Dorothy's full inheritance. I was thinking we should discuss how I can best help you and Brad build your future together. Sarah's excitement was immediate and overwhelming. "Mom, that's incredible. When can we talk? We could meet for lunch tomorrow if you're free." "Actually, I was hoping we could have a proper family dinner at your house. I'd love to see the renovation plans and meet with Brad's parents to discuss everything together. I want to make sure we approach this thoughtfully." There was a brief pause, and I could practically hear Sarah's mind racing. The prospect of having the entire Patterson family present when I discussed my inheritance was clearly appealing to her. "That sounds perfect," she said finally. "Saturday evening I'll make sure everyone can be here. Mom, this means so much to us. You can't imagine how grateful we are." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like a stranger in my own skin. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a loving mother excited to surprise her daughter with a generous gift. Now I was plotting to expose my own child's participation in a conspiracy to defraud me. The transformation felt surreal, but the evidence was undeniable. Over the next few days, Janet's surveillance revealed the extent of the Patterson family's preparation for our dinner. She photographed Patricia Patterson visiting an expensive catering company and charging an elaborate meal to yet another maxed-out credit card. She documented Robert Patterson printing what appeared to be fraudulent construction estimates and investment proposals. Most disturbingly, she captured Brad practicing emotional appeals in his backyard, while Sarah coached him on which phrases would be most effective in manipulating me. "They're treating this like a military operation," Janet reported. "Sarah has prepared talking points about your grandchildren's future education expenses and the importance of family investments. Patricia Patterson has researched luxury retirement communities and plans to suggest you'd be happier in managed care. They're covering every angle." The irony was staggering. The same people who'd been excluding me from family events for 3 years were now planning to convince me that giving them my money was the best way to ensure my own happiness and security. Frank's final preparation involved setting up safeguards for my actual finances. "I've moved Dorothy's inheritance into protected accounts that require dual signatures for any withdrawals," he explained. "Even if they somehow force you to sign documents during dinner, they won't be able to access any real money." Saturday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm weather for October. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a navy blue dress Michael had bought me for our 20th wedding anniversary. I wanted to look like a woman who took financial decisions seriously, not someone who could be easily manipulated or dismissed. Janet helped me test the recording equipment one final time. "Remember, you don't need to be confrontational," she reminded me. "Just ask questions and let them reveal their true intentions. The more they talk, the more evidence we'll have." As I drove to Sarah's house, my hands were steady on the steering wheel for the first time in weeks. The crying was over. The planning was complete. The poker face had served its purpose. Now it was time for the truth to emerge, regardless of how devastating it might be. Sarah met me at the door with a hug that felt genuine, which somehow made everything worse. For a moment, I could almost believe we were just having a normal family dinner, that the past few weeks of investigation and discovery had been some terrible nightmare. Mom, you look beautiful," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Everyone's so excited to see you. We've prepared your favorite wine, and Patricia made that salmon dish you complimented last Christmas." The living room was transformed from the pristine showplace I remembered into something resembling a business meeting. The coffee table was covered with architectural plans, construction estimates, and investment brochures. Brad's parents sat on the sofa like royalty holding court, dressed in expensive clothes that now seemed like costumes in a performance about wealth and success. "Annabelle, how lovely to see you," Patricia Patterson said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're so grateful you could join us for this important family discussion." Robert Patterson stood to shake my hand, his grip firm and confident. "Sarah has told us about Dorothy's generous gift to you. We have some exciting opportunities to share that could benefit everyone involved." As I settled into the armchair they'd positioned facing their makeshift presentation area, I realized they'd orchestrated every detail of the evening: the seating arrangement, the formal display of documents. Even the timing of dinner was calculated to create maximum pressure for quick decisions. They had no idea they were about to participate in their own destruction. Frank's voice echoed in my memory. "Remember, Annabelle, they need you more than you need them. Let them convince you of that." The trap was set. The recording equipment was active. The legal documents were ready. All that remained was to let the Patterson family reveal exactly who they really were in their own words, captured forever on audio that would serve as evidence in the criminal proceedings to come. "Well," I said, settling back in my chair with a smile that matched Patricia's for insincerity, "I'm eager to hear about these opportunities you mentioned. Tell me everything." The salmon dinner tasted like cardboard in my mouth, but I maintained my pleasant expression throughout the meal, while the Patterson family performed their carefully rehearsed show of familial warmth. Patricia complimented my dress. Robert asked about my work at the hospital with the tone of a man humoring a child's hobby. Brad regaled us with stories about his construction projects that I now knew were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. Sarah played her role perfectly, hanging on every word from her in-laws, while shooting me encouraging smiles that said, "See how wonderful they are. See how lucky I am to be part of this family." As Patricia served coffee and store-bought tiramisu in expensive dishes, Robert cleared his throat and announced it was time for our family business discussion. The transformation was immediate and startling. The warm, welcoming host disappeared, replaced by people with the focused intensity of sharks, sensing blood in the water. "Annabelle, we want you to know how much we appreciate your generosity towards Sarah and Brad." Robert began spreading construction estimates across the coffee table, like a fortune teller laying out tarot cards. "Your gift of $24,000 demonstrates the kind of family commitment we value in our household." Patricia nodded approvingly. "It shows you understand the importance of investing in the younger generation's success. Family money should work for family advancement." I sipped my coffee and maintained my interested expression while Janet's recording device captured every word. "Of course, I want to do everything I can to help Sarah build her future." Brad leaned forward eagerly, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Mom Walsh, we've prepared a comprehensive plan for maximizing the impact of your inheritance. These bathroom renovations are just the beginning of what we could accomplish with the right investment strategy." He handed me a folder containing what appeared to be professional construction proposals and investment opportunities. A quick glance revealed documents that looked impressive, but were filled with vague language and promises that could mean anything or nothing. "This first project would transform our house into a showcase property," Brad continued. "The increased value would benefit everyone in the family, and the renovation quality would reflect well on all of us when we entertain business associates and community leaders." Sarah jumped in with practiced enthusiasm. "Mom, imagine how proud you'll feel knowing you helped create something so beautiful. And think about your future grandchildren growing up in such a lovely environment." The mention of grandchildren was clearly calculated to tug at my heartstrings, but it had the opposite effect. These people were using my dreams of family happiness as ammunition in their campaign to rob me blind. The total investment for the complete renovation would be $85,000, Robert said, sliding another set of papers across the table. "We've structured it as a family loan with generous terms that would allow you to see returns on your investment while helping your daughter's family thrive." I pretended to study the documents while my mind reeled at their audacity. $85,000. nearly half of Dorothy's entire inheritance demanded within minutes of dinner being served. They weren't even pretending this was about Sarah's happiness anymore. This was about the Patterson family's survival. "That's quite a substantial amount," I said carefully. "I want to make sure I understand all the details before making such an important decision." Patricia's smile became strained around the edges. "Of course, dear. Though I should mention that construction costs are rising rapidly this time of year. The longer we wait, the more expensive the project becomes." Robert nodded gravely. "Our contractors have given us a limited window for their availability. If we miss this opportunity, we might not be able to secure their services until next summer." The pressure tactics were as transparent as they were insulting. They assumed I was too naive to recognize manufactured urgency when I heard it. That's when Frank Morrison's voice came from the front hallway. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The effect on the Patterson family was immediate and dramatic. Robert's confident demeanor cracked like a mask dropping from his face. Patricia's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to shake. Brad looked like he'd been caught cheating on an exam. Only Sarah seemed genuinely confused rather than terrified. "Mom, who is that?" "My attorney," I replied calmly as Frank entered the living room carrying his briefcase. "I asked him to join us since we're discussing such significant financial arrangements. I hope you don't mind." Frank Morrison commanded attention the way successful lawyers do, with quiet confidence and an aura of competence that made other people feel suddenly inadequate. He was 58 years old, impeccably dressed, and possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that could slice through deception like a scalpel. "Good evening, everyone," he said pleasantly, accepting the chair Sarah hastily provided. "Mrs. Walsh has asked me to review any documents before she makes commitments regarding her inheritance from Dorothy's estate." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Robert Patterson's face had gone pale beneath his artificial tan. Patricia was gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles were white. Brad looked like he was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Frank opened his briefcase and pulled out several manila folders. "Before we discuss your renovation proposals, I think it would be helpful to address some irregularities we've discovered regarding Mrs. Walsh's financial accounts." He placed the first folder on the coffee table and opened it to reveal copies of loan applications bearing my forged signature. "Can any of you explain how Mrs. Walsh's name came to appear on these credit applications that she never submitted?" The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Sarah picked up one of the applications and studied it with growing horror. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally devastation as she realized what she was looking at. I don't understand," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Frank continued with surgical precision. "We also have documentation of credit cards opened in Mrs. Walsh's name, charges made to accounts she never authorized, and financial references provided without her knowledge or consent." He opened the second folder, revealing Janet's photographs of Brad at illegal gambling operations and Patricia shopping with credit cards that showed my name. The pattern suggests a systematic effort to exploit Mrs. Walsh's financial resources and credit history. Robert Patterson finally found his voice. "Now see here, this is highly irregular. You can't just barge into a family dinner and start making accusations." Frank's smile was polite but dangerous. "I'm not making accusations, Mr. Patterson. I'm presenting evidence of financial fraud that's already been reported to the appropriate authorities." The word authorities hit the room like a physical blow. Patricia Patterson made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Brad's face had gone completely white. Sarah was staring at the loan applications as if they might disappear if she looked at them hard enough. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said desperately. "Mom, tell them there's been a mistake." I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for this person who'd been helping strangers steal my identity while pretending to be grateful for my generosity. The only mistake was mine, I said quietly. I trusted people who saw me as nothing more than a source of money to solve their problems. That's when Sarah's facade finally cracked completely. Mom, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. Brad's family has expectations, and I couldn't disappoint them. I couldn't let them think I came from nothing. So you decided to steal from the woman who gave you everything, I asked. The room exploded into chaos. Patricia Patterson began screaming about ungrateful relatives and legal harassment. Robert shouted about family loyalty and misunderstood intentions. Brad accused me of trying to destroy his marriage out of jealousy. But it was Sarah's response that broke what remained of my heart. She looked directly at me with tears streaming down her face and said, I never asked you to sacrifice everything for me. I never asked you to work those extra shifts or live in that tiny apartment. You chose to do those things, and now you're using them against me. Frank Morrison closed his folders and stood up calmly amid the chaos. I think this conversation has provided all the clarity we need. Mrs. Walsh, shall we discuss the next steps privately? As we prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed my arm with desperate intensity. Mom, please. We can fix this. I'll pay you back everything, I promise. Don't destroy my marriage over money. I looked at my daughter one last time, this stranger wearing the face of the child I'd loved unconditionally. This was never about money, Sarah. This was about discovering that the daughter I raised doesn't exist anymore. As Frank and I walked toward the door, Patricia Patterson's voice followed us down the hallway. You'll regret this, you spiteful old woman. You'll die alone and forgotten while we move on with our lives. I paused at the front door and turned back to address the family that had spent 3 years treating me like an unwelcome intruder in my own daughter's life. Mrs. Patterson, I said calmly, in about 10 minutes, you're going to have much bigger problems than whether or not you like me. Frank checked his watch as we walked to our cars. Janet should be calling the authorities right about now. They'll arrive before anyone can destroy evidence or flee. As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Through Sarah's living room window, I could see the Patterson family frantically gathering papers and arguing among themselves. The poker face phase was over. The confrontation had exceeded my wildest expectations. The next phase was about to begin, and it would determine whether justice was truly possible or if the wealthy and connected could escape consequences for their actions. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. Not a naive victim or a useful bank account. Just Annabelle Walsh, a woman who'd finally stopped apologizing for expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. The police cars arrived at Sarah's house exactly 12 minutes after Frank and I left, their flashing lights painting the elegant Brookline neighborhood in alternating red and blue. I watched from Frank's car parked 2 blocks away as officers surrounded the property and began what would become a 7-hour investigation into the Patterson family's financial crimes. Frank's phone rang continuously with updates from Janet, who was coordinating with detectives and federal investigators. The evidence we'd gathered was just the beginning. The authorities had been tracking interstate financial fraud for months, and our case provided the missing pieces of a much larger puzzle. The FBI is taking over, Frank informed me after his 4th phone call. This connects to investigations in 3 other states. The Pattersons have been running variations of this scam for at least 5 years. By midnight, the full scope of their operation was becoming clear. Patricia Patterson's sister in Florida hadn't been their first victim. She'd been part of a network of elderly relatives who'd been systematically targeted and exploited. The cousin in Providence was connected to an investment fraud that had bilked dozens of retirees out of their life savings. But the most shocking discovery came when detectives searched the Patterson house and found detailed files on potential victims, including comprehensive financial profiles and emotional manipulation strategies. My file was labeled Sentimental Mother, Prime Target, and contained notes about my work schedule, my isolation after Michael's death, and my desperate need for family approval. Sarah's role in gathering this information was documented in email exchanges between her and Patricia Patterson. Messages dating back 18 months showed my daughter providing updates on my financial status, my emotional vulnerabilities, and my daily routines. She hadn't been gradually manipulated into participating in their schemes. She'd been an active intelligence gatherer from the beginning. The most devastating email was dated just 2 weeks after my birthday dinner disaster. Sarah wrote to Patricia, "Mom seems suspicious about the check delay. Should we accelerate the timeline, I can get her medical records from the hospital if we need to use the dementia angle." Frank showed me this email in his office the next morning, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to be sick. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me financially. She'd been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to gain control of Dorothy's entire inheritance. "Annabelle," Frank said gently when I returned, "I know this is devastating, but you need to understand how sophisticated their operation was. Sarah wasn't just helping them rob you. They were grooming her to be your guardian, so they could access every penny you have." Over the following days, the arrests began in earnest. Brad Patterson was picked up at Logan Airport trying to board a flight to Mexico with forged identification documents. Robert Patterson was arrested at his construction office while attempting to destroy financial records. Patricia Patterson turned herself in after her lawyer convinced her that cooperation might reduce her sentence. Sarah was the last to be arrested 3 days after the dinner confrontation. According to Janet, who witnessed the event, Sarah collapsed in her driveway when the federal agents arrived with handcuffs. She kept screaming that she was the real victim, that her mother had abandoned her, that the Patterson family had given her the love and acceptance I'd failed to provide. The irony of her claims wasn't lost on anyone who'd seen the evidence. Sarah had received more love and support than most children could dream of, but it had never been enough to satisfy her hunger for status and material wealth. As the legal proceedings began, more victims emerged from across New England. The investigation uncovered a sophisticated network of fraud that had operated for years without detection. The Patterson family had targeted elderly relatives, church members, and isolated widows with surgical precision, using different family members to establish relationships and gather intelligence. Frank estimated the total damages at over $800,000 stolen from dozens of victims. My $24,000 check was pocket change compared to the inheritance they'd extracted from Patricia's aunt in Connecticut, or the life insurance payout they'd convinced a grieving widower in Vermont to invest in their construction business. The media coverage was extensive and embarrassing for everyone involved. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story titled, "Beacon Hill Family's Web of Elder Fraud." Sarah's photograph appeared in newspapers across Massachusetts, identified as a key conspirator in what prosecutors called one of the most callous financial exploitation schemes in recent memory. But the personal cost was harder to measure than the financial damage. I spent weeks in a strange emotional limbo, grieving for a daughter who was still alive, but had revealed herself to be someone I'd never known. The Sarah I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had either never existed or had died somewhere along the way to becoming Patricia Patterson's willing accomplice. Frank helped me navigate the legal complexities of recovering my stolen money and identity. The forged loans were canceled, the unauthorized credit cards were closed, and the various fraud charges were reversed. but money was easier to recover than trust or love, or the sense of family I'd lost. 3 months after the arrests, Sarah's court-appointed lawyer contacted Frank about a plea agreement. Sarah would testify against the Patterson family in exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years probation and community service. Part of the agreement required her to write a formal apology to me and attend counseling for addiction to material wealth. The apology letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, handwritten on legal pad paper rather than the expensive stationery Sarah had favored during her years with the Patterson family. Her handwriting looked smaller somehow, less confident than I remembered. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to fix what I've done to you. I know that explaining my reasons sounds like making excuses for the inexcusable. But I need you to understand that I never meant for things to go this far." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Sarah's gradual transformation from grateful daughter to willing participant in financial fraud. She described feeling ashamed of our modest lifestyle when she saw how the Patterson family lived. She explained how their approval became more important to her than my feelings or welfare. "I convinced myself that you wouldn't miss the money," she wrote. "You lived so simply, needed so little, while Brad's family showed me a world where money meant freedom and respect and belonging. I thought if I could just get enough to truly belong with them, I could bring you into that world too." The letter ended with a request that felt both heartbreaking and infuriating. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, but I hope someday you might let me try to earn your trust back. The counselor says I need to understand the difference between wanting things and needing love. I'm learning that I confused the two for a very long time." Frank read the letter with me and offered his professional opinion. "It sounds genuine, but people facing criminal charges often discover sincerity when they need character references for sentencing." I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, unsure whether it represented genuine remorse or another attempt at manipulation. The daughter I'd raised would have been incapable of the systematic deception Sarah had practiced for years. But maybe the daughter I'd raised had been a fantasy all along, and this was the first honest communication I'd received from the real Sarah in decades. The Patterson family faced much harsher consequences. Robert and Patricia each received sentences of 5 to 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy fraud and elder abuse. Brad's gambling addiction wasn't considered a mitigating factor. He received 8 years for his role as the primary architect of their schemes. Their Beacon Hill house was sold to pay restitution to victims. The country club membership was terminated. The construction business was dissolved and its assets were distributed among the subcontractors and suppliers they'd cheated over the years. But the most satisfying consequence was completely unintended. The media coverage attracted the attention of other fraud investigators, and the network of respected families who'd enabled the Pattersons' crimes began facing their own legal troubles. The country club's board discovered that several members had been running similar schemes, leading to a federal investigation that ultimately resulted in the club's bankruptcy. The world of wealth and status that Sarah had sacrificed our relationship to join turned out to be built on quicksand, and it was collapsing around everyone who'd chosen money and appearances over honesty and genuine relationships. As spring turned to summer, I realized that justice wasn't just about legal consequences or financial restitution. It was about discovering that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than the people who'd tried to exploit me, and worthy of relationships based on love and respect, rather than utility. The crying was over. The anger was fading. The next phase of my life was about to begin, and for the first time in years, I was excited about what that might look like. 6 months after the confrontation at Sarah's house, I stood in the conference room of Morrison Walsh and Associates, watching Frank sign the final papers that established the Dorothy Walsh Foundation for Elder Protection. The foundation would use a significant portion of my aunt's inheritance to help elderly victims of financial fraud recover their stolen assets and rebuild their lives. Dorothy would have loved this, Frank said as he handed me my copy of the incorporation documents. She spent her whole life fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The foundation's first client was Patricia Patterson's sister in Florida, a 74-year-old widow named Margaret, who'd lost her retirement savings to the family's investment schemes. When I called to tell her about the foundation's legal assistance program, she cried on the phone for 10 minutes before she could speak. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I thought I was just a foolish old woman who'd been taken advantage of by my own family." Margaret's relief reminded me of how I'd felt during those first weeks after discovering Sarah's betrayal, isolated, ashamed, and convinced that my own judgment was fundamentally flawed. But recovery wasn't just about getting money back. It was about rebuilding the confidence that financial predators deliberately destroy in their victims. Janet Walsh had left her private investigation business to become the foundation's director of victim services. Her experience with financial crimes made her uniquely qualified to help people navigate both the legal system and the emotional aftermath of family betrayal. "The hardest part isn't prosecuting the criminals," Janet explained during our first board meeting. "It's helping victims understand that being trusting doesn't make them stupid, and that loving someone who turns out to be unworthy doesn't reflect poorly on their character." The foundation's work was already making a difference across New England. We'd helped recover over $300,000 for victims in our first 6 months, but more importantly, we'd created a support network that proved these elderly targets weren't alone in their experiences. My personal life had undergone an equally dramatic transformation. The apartment that had once felt like a symbol of my modest circumstances now felt like a sanctuary filled with genuine friendships and meaningful work. Frank had become a close friend whose company I genuinely enjoyed. Janet visited regularly, bringing cases that needed attention and stories about her own journey from police work to victim advocacy. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who'd alerted me to Sarah's rehearsed crying sessions, had become an unexpected source of wisdom and companionship. She was 83 years old, had survived the Chinese Revolution, and built a successful import business in Boston, and possessed a sharp wit that could cut through deception like a laser. "People show you who they are," Mrs. Chen told me over tea one afternoon. "Your daughter showed you. Her husband's family showed you. Now you show them who you are by how you respond." The legal proceedings had concluded with outcomes that exceeded Frank's most optimistic predictions. The federal investigation had expanded beyond the Patterson family to encompass a network of financial predators operating throughout New England. Sarah's cooperation had been instrumental in securing convictions that sent dozens of criminals to prison. But Sarah herself remained a complicated chapter in my story. Her probation required monthly check-ins with a counselor who specialized in materialistic addiction and family relationship disorders. The reports Frank received indicated genuine progress in understanding how her values had become corrupted, but also revealed the depth of work required to rebuild her capacity for authentic relationships. 8 months after our confrontation, Sarah sent her first letter that didn't mention money legal proceedings or requests for forgiveness. Instead, she wrote about her community service work at a senior center in Worcester, where she was helping elderly residents with basic computer skills and financial literacy. "Working with these people has shown me what I lost when I chose the Patterson family over you," she wrote. "These residents treat me with kindness and respect, even though I can't give them anything except my time and attention. I forgot what that felt like." The letter continued with observations about the residents' stories, their resilience in the face of financial struggles, and their dignity despite living in circumstances much more modest than the Patterson family's former lifestyle. "There's a woman named Rose who reminds me of you," Sarah wrote. "She raised 3 children alone after her husband died, worked 2 jobs to put them through school, and never complained about the sacrifices she made. Her children visit every week, bring their own children, and treat her like the hero she is. I understand now what I threw away." Reading that letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope that my daughter might be capable of genuine change. Not because she wanted something from me, but because she was finally learning to value things that couldn't be bought or stolen. Frank cautioned me against expecting too much too quickly. "People can change, but it's usually a long process with setbacks and complications. Don't let hope make you vulnerable to new manipulation." His advice was sound, but I'd learned to trust my instincts again. The woman who'd written that letter sounded different from the person who'd pushed me out of her house to impress her in-laws. Whether that difference was permanent remained to be seen, but it was a beginning. The Foundation's work continued to expand, drawing attention from federal agencies and victim advocacy groups across the country. We were invited to present our model at conferences in Washington and Chicago. The irony wasn't lost on me that the money Dorothy had left to secure my retirement was instead funding a national movement to protect other elderly people from the kind of exploitation I'd experienced. On the first anniversary of the dinner confrontation, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah appeared at my apartment door carrying a small wrapped package, her face showing the effects of a year spent confronting uncomfortable truths about herself and her choices. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said immediately. "I wanted to bring you this and tell you something important." The package contained a ceramic bird similar to the ones Michael used to buy me, but clearly handmade rather than store-bought. Sarah had made it herself in a pottery class she'd started during her community service. "It's not as beautiful as the ones Dad bought you," she said, "but I made it myself with my own hands, thinking about all the times you've told me how much those birds meant to you." We sat in my living room, the space Sarah had once dismissed as quaint, and had our first honest conversation in years. She told me about losing her job after her arrest, about learning to live on unemployment benefits and food bank donations, about discovering which friends had valued her for herself versus her connection to the Patterson family's wealth. "I want you to know that I understand what I did to you," she said. "Not just the money or the legal documents, but the betrayal of everything you'd given me. I chose people who valued me for what I could provide over the person who'd loved me unconditionally my entire life." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she continued. "I don't expect you to trust me again immediately. I don't even know if I trust myself yet. But I want to try to earn your love back if you'll let me." Looking at my daughter, I saw traces of the child I'd raised alongside evidence of the woman she'd become through hard experience. The entitled, manipulative person who'd participated in defrauding me was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely humbled by the consequences of her choices. "Trust has to be rebuilt slowly," I told her. "But love was never the problem, Sarah. I never stopped loving you even when I couldn't like the person you'd become." We agreed to begin with monthly visits, phone calls without agenda, and participation in family counseling to address the wounds that had made Sarah vulnerable to the Patterson family's influence in the first place. There would be no money discussions, no requests for help with legal or financial problems. Just 2 women trying to rediscover the relationship that had been buried under years of misplaced priorities. As I watched Sarah leave that evening carrying herself with a new kind of dignity that came from earning respect rather than buying it, I realized that justice had taken many forms over the past year. The legal system had punished the criminals and compensated the victims. The foundation was protecting other elderly people from similar exploitation. But perhaps the most satisfying justice was witnessing Sarah's transformation from entitled consumer to contributing member of society. The ceramic bird now sits on my mantle next to Michael's collection, a reminder that people can change when they're willing to confront hard truths about themselves. It's not as perfect as the store-bought birds, but it's authentic in a way that makes it more precious than any expensive gift could ever be. 3 years have passed since that terrible birthday dinner, and my life has become richer than I ever imagined possible. The foundation has helped hundreds of elderly victims recover from financial fraud. Sarah and I have rebuilt a relationship based on honesty rather than obligation. Frank and I have developed a partnership that extends beyond legal matters into genuine friendship and mutual respect. Most importantly, I've learned that self-worth isn't negotiable. The people who deserve to be in your life are those who value you for who you are, not what you can provide. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is refusing to enable their worst behavior, even when that person is your own child. The foundation work has shown me that my experience, painful as it was, has purpose. Every victim we help recover their stolen assets, every family we educate about financial manipulation, every criminal we help prosecute represents justice extending far beyond my personal situation. Dorothy would indeed have been proud. She built her restaurant empire by treating people fairly and expecting the same treatment in return. The foundation continues her legacy by proving that dignity and respect aren't luxuries available only to the wealthy. They're basic human rights that everyone deserves to enjoy. As I prepare for another day of foundation work, I'm grateful for the hard-learned wisdom that came from my daughter's betrayal. The experience taught me that survival isn't just about enduring difficult circumstances. It's about discovering strengths you never knew you possessed and using them to protect others facing similar challenges. Life has a funny way of turning our worst experiences into our greatest sources of strength. The woman who was pushed out of her daughter's house for embarrassing the in-laws became the founder of an organization that protects elderly people across New England from financial predators. The mother whose own child participated in defrauding her became an advocate who helps other families heal from similar betrayals. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and using your painful experiences to prevent others from suffering the same harm. Justice served cold might be satisfying in the moment, but justice served with purpose and compassion creates lasting change that extends far beyond personal vindication. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood relations or legal documents. It's defined by people who choose to love, support, and respect you consistently over time. My chosen family now includes Frank, Janet, Mrs. Chen, and the many victims who've become advocates for others facing similar challenges. And yes, it includes Sarah again, but in a new way based on mutual respect, rather than parental obligation. She's earning her place in my life through her actions, her growth, and her commitment to becoming someone worthy of the love I'd always offered freely. The Dorothy Walsh Foundation continues to grow, helping more victims every month, while educating communities about financial fraud prevention. We've proven that elderly people don't have to accept being targets for manipulation and theft. We've shown that families can heal from betrayal when all parties are willing to do the hard work of genuine change. Most importantly, we've demonstrated that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about creating systems that protect vulnerable people and support those who've been harmed. True justice builds something better from the ashes of something terrible. What about you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who took advantage of your generosity? How do you balance love and self-protection when the people closest to you become the greatest threat to your well-being. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember that your experiences might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to empowerment. Your support and engagement make it possible for stories like mine to reach people who need to hear them. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, and share it with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in dealing with difficult family dynamics. Remember, you are worth more than what you can provide to others, and the people who truly love you will prove it through their actions, not just their words. May you find the strength to protect yourself and the wisdom to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that you deserve to be valued for exactly who you are.